I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
We have Norma joining us with some information. Tom, I'm going to have you go ahead and kick this off.
Yeah, absolutely. Norma, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. Good to hear from you again. You and I spoke the other day, and you've got some information that you haven't shared with us before, and it was actually really interesting. So I'm just going to hand it to you. Start from the beginning. Let's hear it.
Anything ever about Bigfoot not interesting?
Well, that's a good question. No.
I don't think so. So the first incident that I'm going to talk about happened when my cousin Lisa and her son Anthony were house sitting and dog sitting for a doctor friend of hers. So she was over there doing, that for them, and excuse me, and she was over there, I think, for a few days, and the doctor, when the doctors are there, I guess they don't utilize on their backyard space, even though they have a small deck, but they don't go out there very often, nor do they do a lot of cooking. But she's a pretty big cook. She likes to cook a lot, so she was over there that time, and it was kind of warm during the day evening hours, and she was cooking, and she had the windows open, and all those smells were going out, into the backyard, into the air. So when she was done, and at the end of the night, she was taking the dogs out. They have 3 dogs. There were 2 pugs that were older, really old. One was blind and deaf, and the other one was one or the other. I can't remember. And then they had a black lab. So their backyard is pretty small. It's long, but it's pretty narrow. So there's not much of a backyard. I would say probably from the house to the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 feet. So there wasn't much of a lawn. So at any rate, she takes, for the, last time taking the dogs out for the night, she had taken the pugs out onto the yard and had called the lab was actually on the deck. And she called the lab out to go out and, do his business before they were retired for the night. And so the pugs, like I said, they are oblivious to anything because they can't see or hear. The lab, however, would not come off the deck, which is unusual, behavior for him. And she thought, well, that's pretty strange. Why isn't he coming off the deck? And so he actually went back in the house. So she was out there with the pugs very near the tree line, and she was probably out there about 5 minutes. And then she heard this knock on a tree very close to her. Now she's not been out with us doing any kind of Bigfoot stuff, but she knows all about it because we've taken her son out quite a few times with us at that point. So we've always told her, the stories, and I'm sure he has told her things, and they've talked about it. So she knows what goes on, and she knows, the things that we hear. So when she heard that, she knew what she was hearing, but she didn't, she's out in the yard and she hears that, and she didn't do anything. She stood there and she pretended not to hear it. So, but she definitely heard it, and she got kind of a little nervous. So, and she stayed there, and she just kind of stayed and waited for the pugs to do whatever. So a couple minutes goes by and it happens again. And again, this is very close to where she was. So she, at that point, got a little nervous, a little more nervous, and that was it for her. She said, I'm just going to walk back to the house and go back in the house. So she didn't call me that night or the next day. She called me like 2 weeks later, and she told me, I think we were going to hang out with Anthony and go somewhere with Anthony. And so she told me about what happened, and I said, "What? Why didn't you call us? Why didn't you call us that night? I mean, we would have come over and, to see what was going on." And she's like, "I don't know. I just didn't even, think about it." And I said, "Okay, well, when's the next time you're going to be going over there?" And she said, "Probably in a couple weeks." And I said, "All right, well, when you go over there, let us know and we'll make plans to come over and, see if we can figure anything out. We'll, take a walk behind the house and see what we can see or figure out." So she ended up calling us back and saying, "Hey, we're going to be there, in a couple weeks. Why don't you guys come over for dinner and we'll hang out and then you guys can do your thing." So we did that. We went over, we did our dinner thing. And but before dinner, Bob and I and Anthony took a walk behind the house. We went into the woods and just kind of meandered around and, just to see what we could see. And really actually what was behind there. We wanted to see if there was, houses close by, maybe behind there. I hadn't at that point Googled anything to see, get a topo of the area. So we weren't even sure what exactly was going on there. It is in a farming type community. So it's a very small town. But I mean, there's just, when I talked to her the other day, I asked her for the address again. And I looked on Google Maps and I sent it to you too, Tom, what it looked like behind that house. And there are just acres of woods and farm, fields connected to farm fields. There isn't a whole lot behind there. Very easy to, for a Bigfoot to hang out there, let's just say. So I looked up that, and I looked that up the other night when I was before I talked to you, Tom, and I was pretty amazed at how vast that area was, void of anything other than what I said, farm fields. There's a couple rivers. There's one on one side that's bigger, and there's one on a smaller one on the other side. So there's waterways. There's plenty of, I'm sure, food out there and shelter, or some sort of shelter. So it was pretty amazing to me. And I don't know why I didn't do it before, but it was pretty amazing to me to see how vast that was.
It's huge. Yeah.
And kind of in hindsight, I guess, it's like I really never, I don't know why, but I never really looked it up to see what was out there. I knew the town, so I knew that it was a farming community, but I didn't really, look at it. So back to going out there, Bob and I and Anthony, again, there was nothing really out there to, impress us. I mean, it was leaf litter, so you couldn't see anything if there were footprints or anything like that. Probably in 2 weeks, it might not have, been very evident anyway. And we didn't really see anything that kind of got our attention. So we ended up going back in the house and and chit-chatted for a little while longer. And then Bob had to leave. He had something going on in the morning, so he had to leave. Lisa wasn't feeling good, so she planned on just letting Anthony and I just go at it and just, do what we're going to do. And she was going to go to bed. So what Anthony and I did, we went upstairs to the second floor, and went into one of the rooms that was facing the wood line, was facing the backyard and into the woods. So we're up there and we raised the window, and this is probably like November. So we put the window up and we kind of sat by the window and listened, just to whatever was out there. We didn't know what was going to go on. I also did not bring my listening device because, this was like, I'm just going to go there and see if there's really anything to get overly excited about. So, I mean, I know what she heard and everything, but, I guess it's like, well, I did another rookie thing. I didn't bring my
Uh-oh.
recorder. I'm just a little annoyed with these little rookie things that I realize now that I did that I shouldn't have done. But at any rate, I didn't bring my recorder, and so it was just basically we're listening, with our naked ears. So we're sitting there, and again, it's not that far, from the house to the woods, so we could hear whatever was out there. So we're sitting there for a little while and we're talking and nothing really going on. And I would have to say probably we were sitting there for probably maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour, and nothing's happening. So, and every once in a while, I would just kind of, and I don't do this, but every once in a while, I would just go, I would just make this little whoop sound. I'd go whoop, whoop, just out of the window, just to see, if anything would, I wasn't really expecting anything to happen, but, just doing that. So we sat there for about that length of time. And then all of a sudden we started to hear some movement in the woods. So we're like, oh, okay, well, we just kind of listened and see what was going on. And it sounded like, I don't know, maybe it was something was coming, closer, not extremely closer to the house, but it was in that area in front of where we were. So we just listened for a little while, and there's something moving around. We're like, okay, well, it could be anything, could be a deer passing through, could be a little, raccoon, could be anything. So we just listened for a little while. Then it started to pick up a little bit. It was moving more often, and you could hear the leaf litter, under whatever it was that was moving. And so we listened to, a little bit more, and this, whatever it was, it stayed in that same vicinity, kind of going left to right. And it was weird because it would go, we'd hear it on the right hand side, and we'd be listening to it, and then, like, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 seconds later, it's over on the left hand side, and we didn't really hear it go over there, but there was nothing, on the right hand side still making noise. So we're like, okay, we'll just see see what happens, with this. And it would do that every now and again. It would just like, it would come back to the middle area and then it would go to the right, and it's just like moving around. And when Bob and I go out and do our research now, we have a lot of this same thing going on. And we've talked about it before. We think that there's a sentry out there. And so it was similar. It was staying within, I would say, maybe, I don't know, like a 30-foot circumference or something. It was just in the, left and right and staying in the middle. And it stayed in the middle for a while. You could hear it. We could hear it out in front of us. And then it would move, left or right. So it was doing this for quite some time. I mean, like, again, another hour and a half. We're just kind of like talking. He and I are talking, and like, what is it that's over there? What is it doing? And we can't see anything, obviously, in the wood line, but it wasn't terrible. It was, I think it was a half moon, and there were clouds that would cover and, uncover the moon. So the ambient light was kind of dull, but when it was good, we could see into the yard, but we couldn't see into the woods. So again, we sat there for a while. And so probably, like I said, an hour and a half, Anthony, he said, well, I'm going to go take a nap. I'm going to go in the other room and just kind of get some sleep and let me know if anything is going on. So I sat, he left. I was in the room by myself, and I'm kind of, my nose is up to the screen, and my arms are on the windowsill. So I'm kind of leaning on the windowsill, just kind of peering out, into the yard and into the woods. And so, yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. And this was going on for a while. So there was nothing, dramatic. I mean, it didn't knock. It didn't, throw anything. It was just moving from, wherever. So I must have been there for another half an hour, I would say, with this doing the same thing that it had been doing. And all of a sudden, I heard like water. And I was like, what is that? Is it raining? So I'm listening, and it wasn't raining. I could specifically like narrow in where the water was coming from. It was a stream of whatever it was, and it sounded pretty like a pretty hefty stream. And do you know what I mean by stream? It was like
Garden hose.
yeah, almost like a garden hose, somebody turning a garden hose on. And it sounded like it was coming from, it wasn't like low to the ground. I don't know if can you guys decipher what I'm saying? Can you, when you're out there and you hear something coming from a little higher up than a little lower down, you know what I'm saying? And this thing sounded like that water was hitting the leaves, and it was a pretty good, it was a pretty good sized stream. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, is that thing peeing?
Yeah, that's exactly normal. We talked about it.
Oh my gosh. I was like, what the heck? And I'm kind of like, wow. And it kind of went on for a little while. It's just this stream, and then obviously it stopped. And I was like, wow, what was that? And of course I'm thinking in my head, something just peed. So I'm sitting there at the window, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna, keep listening. And again, once that stopped, it started moving around again. So I listened to that for another probably 20 minutes, half an hour. And, Anthony's sleeping, and I'm there by myself, and I'm like, wouldn't you figure Anthony would go to sleep at this point in time, and stuff starts to happen. So again, I'm sitting there at the window wondering if I should wake Anthony up and tell him what happened. And all of a sudden, this thing came rushing toward the house through the woods. It came, just, you could hear it just running toward the house. And I thought this thing was going to come out of the wood line and into the yard. That's how quickly and how fast it was running. And I actually I was sitting on a chair or, a bench or something by the window. And the position, like I told you, my arms were kind of on the windowsill, my nose to the screen. And when this happened, I actually sat back away from the window because I thought this, and I think about it now, and I told you, Tom, I thought about it and I'm like, why am I pushing back away from the window when I'm on the second story? So, but I just instinctively pushed back away from the window in anticipation of this thing coming out into the yard. But it never did. It stopped before, or what I'm assuming was before it came out into the yard, before the wood line ended, it had stopped. And then everything was quiet. And so I'm still sitting there, kind of back. And then I lean forward to, look again, get closer. And it just started moving around again. And so at this point, so I'm waiting, I waited a little bit and I'm listening to it and it's moving again, just like it was doing before. And I waited to see if maybe it would do that again, or maybe it would come out into the yard at, some point. So I waited there for another probably 15 minutes. And then I went and got Anthony. And I woke Anthony up. I said, dude, you got to come back. I said, you're not going to believe what just happened. A couple things that just happened. I said, you missed, the best part. And so he came back into the room. And we were both sitting at the window. And again, just listening to what was going on. And it didn't do anything else after that, except just moving around from side to side once again. And didn't come out, of course it already peed, so I wasn't going to do that again. But we just sat there and just listened and talked. I said, and I told him about what happened and everything. And, he had basically had it as far as the night was going. I was ready to keep going, but, he was like, wanting to go to bed. So I ended up saying, okay, I guess, I'm just going to head out. So he went back to bed. My cousin Lisa got up and she walked me out, to the driveway. And their driveway, now it's dark out there. There was no light in the driveway, and it's kind of a longer driveway. It kind of goes along with the yard. The yard extended, alongside the driveway. So as I was leaving, I said, as we got to the door, I said, look, you need to stay there because I have to walk to my car, which is about halfway in this long, driveway, and the yard and woods are right there. So you stay there while I walk to my car. So I walked to my car and got in, all the while keeping my eye on the wood line, and got in and then left. And when I got home, obviously told Bob what had happened. So that was pretty interesting. And I don't know why it didn't do anything more than that, or, why it charged like that and not come out. I wish it had come out. I was waiting for it to come out into the yard. Man, was I waiting. And I said to you, Tom, I don't know what I was thinking when I sat back. Did I think it was going to come up to the house and scale the wall, or, or something like that? But again, it was just instinct to push away from that window. But I was still watching to see if it would come out. Now, this happened several years ago. So I don't know why I didn't share that with you before. I shared with you a lot of, new stuff and a lot of recent stuff. But I thought about that the other day, and I think I reached out to you, Will, first to let you know that, I forgot about this, and I don't know why I didn't tell you this story. But that was pretty interesting. What do you think it was doing out there? I mean, what do you? I say this to you all the time, Will. What is doing out there? Because Bob and I go through the same thing, and they're kind of just meandering around, and every now and again, I'm talking about the present,
Mm-hmm.
when this happens, every now and again, they break a bigger stick, or, they start throwing little stones, or, and this guy didn't do that.
It kind of
But
sounds like juvenile behavior.
I mean, that was a pretty big stream, Will. Just saying. That was a pretty good sized juvenile. I mean, it could have been, like a 15-year-old. That would be about right. But yeah, I mean, it could be. I don't know. I wish it had come out, though.
Well,
I don't know.
It's hard telling, really. I mean, for a moment there, I don't want to be, diminish your story, but it kind of had shades of Mountain Monsters. You ever see that show? I only saw a portion of one years ago, and it was where the he was looking at this thing supposedly in a tree, and it was peeing on his face. And my question is,
Um,
why did he stand
yeah,
there and allow this?
yeah. You
Sorry,
know,
I had to go there
that's
for a moment.
yeah, yeah. I remember that episode. We used to watch the Mountain Monsters all the time. I mean, those guys are hysterical. But I remember saying, okay, we went to a conference once, and the people that if Fred, you guys remember Fred, we used to talk a lot, and I talked to other people that, would go out with us, or we were familiar with, kind of our bantering and talking and stuff like that. I said, look, if they're at this conference, I have questions. I have questions.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I would have had questions too.
Oh, I had so many questions. I mean, and I'm not just in them. I really like them. I know it's probably more for entertainment purposes, but for some of the things that went on there, like you were saying with the thing peeing on him or whatever, there were so many things that it's on top of the building, and they would go into the shanty or into this, and whatever it is, whatever cryptid that they were investigating, on that episode, it was always around. So whatever it was that was up on the shanty or up on this, structure, they're inside, the structure. And I'm like, and so where's the cameraman?
Right.
And why are you guys inside the building?
You
If
know,
it's up on the roof, why
I
aren't you?
I got to say my favorite though was their go-to Bigfoot guy, no shoes, Curly,
Oh,
who wore paper bags for pants.
oh my gosh. They were really, I really liked them. I wouldn't have given them a hard time. I would have had fun with them. But, I just, for myself, it's like, if that thing's up on the roof, I'm going to make sure I get it on camera. I'm not going to hide in the building necessarily, or I'd send Bob out to get it on camera.
Oh, there you go. I'm sure he'd be appreciative
Yeah,
of that.
yeah, I don't think so. He would be less willing than I would be going out there. But because he's always thinking, like I said, see, Will, you're like, don't be a sack lunch. So Bob's got this in the back of his head now about the sack.
Good man. That's right. Don't
Oh,
become the ham sandwich or the sack lunch.
right, right. So, yeah, but I mean, it could be. We get this a lot, and I even when we go out now and we listen, things that are going on around us, and I am not honestly, I am not I'm not giving you a fish story here. The fish was this big. This is actually what's going on. And I wonder a lot, and I sit there with Bob, and when we're in the dark, and I'm like, what are they doing? What are they doing? And they would just, again, it's like they're just watching us. And I feel like this thing that was out there that night, at the doctor's house, it was just kind of hanging out, because I'm
Hmm.
sure it saw us in the window. I'm sure
Sure.
it heard us, in the window,
Oh yeah.
talk. But I'm like, why don't you just, why did you stop? I want to yell out the window. Why'd you stop? Just come out. But it just didn't.
We've got another area with a guy that's got a lot of activity, and it's kind of the same thing. They seem to be doing the same things. They're not quite coming out where he can see them. Lots of tracks. I mean, hundreds of tracks. But I told him just to keep doing what he's been doing, and at some point, they may feel comfortable enough to come out and take a direct look at him.
Well, that's the day that I'm wondering, if it does come out. And I didn't tell you this before, but the last time that Bob and I were out before we were curfewed, we went out, and actually I believe Fred was with us that night. We heard something that sounded like a goose. but didn't sound like a goose. And it almost sounded like this. Oh, I wish I could describe it to you. But when it happened, Fred was in a car behind us. Bob and I were in our car. And when this happened, I was sitting there. It kind of happened immediately. It wasn't like something that came off in the distance. It was all of a sudden, it sounded like, I don't know. It sounded like a goose, but it also sounded like it was like breathing heavy. And I thought for sure, as I was sitting there listening to this, and I didn't say, neither of us said anything. We just kind of heard it all of a sudden happened, and we're listening to it. And I'm thinking there were 100 things going through my mind at that point. And I'm like, I thought for sure that was a Bigfoot standing outside of the window, like kind of breathing heavy, making this whatever sound that was. I thought for sure I was going to turn my head and see something looking in the window. But obviously I couldn't see anyway, but obviously I couldn't, it didn't. And this noise that it was making, Bob said, that sounds like a goose. And I'm like, okay, it does sound a little like a goose, but sort of not like a goose. It wasn't this, I mean, we've heard geese many, many, many times, but this was like up close and personal. And I was like, it felt like this thing came right out of the woods and was standing right by the car. And I still have yet to listen to it. I know, quite the discipline that I have. I don't know where it's come from, but Bob and I will usually play it again. We'll play it through and listen to it again. But we haven't yet. We will, but we haven't yet. So it was really interesting. And Fred, of course, he's sitting in the car behind us, and I may be wrong. Sometimes one outing meshes into another, but I'm pretty sure he was there. But he gets a little nervous too when he's alone, and he's alone in the car. We all have, listening devices, and we're in contact with two ways. So one of the nights, his listening device, the batteries died, and there was something going on at that point. There was a lot of activity around us that kind of ramped up, and right at that, at that moment, in the middle of it all, his listening device just died. So he's radioing in to us and saying, my H2 just died. I need you guys, what's going on? I can't hear a thing, kind of thing. And so I'm radioing, I radio back to him, and I'm like, okay, well, just give us a minute, I don't know what's going on out there, but you're just going to have to hang tight until things settle down a little bit. And so every once in a while, he would again radio in and say, all right, what's going on? I said, well, there's still, something going on. So just, hang tight. So, I mean, I think he was there when this goose thing went on. I'll find out when I listen back to the recording, but it was pretty interesting. It was probably, it would, other than that bluff charge, I think that would probably be the closest that I thought a Bigfoot would be to us at that point. So that was pretty interesting too. But I had another that I talked to Tom about, and that was, again, we, in the same area, in our research area, and this was a few years ago, we had decided to go up. And Tom, I know that I've showed you this area before. We go up the mountain, and there's like an open area up there. So almost like almost like a little field, but it's kind of a, like an oval or round shaped field up there. And it's surrounded by, the wood and a lot of trails, like game trails and stuff that we follow. We were up there one night. We Fred had left his car down at the bottom of the mountain, and we all came up. I think he was with me. My other friend Ray, I remember mentioning Ray to you guys too. He came with us, and then we had a friend from Cape Cod and his girlfriend who also came up and met us. So we went out there, and I was planning on kind of bunking in my van, and Ray was doing the same thing. Fred couldn't stay that night overnight, but he stayed a pretty good portion of the night. I don't think he left until like, 2 a.m. So several things happened while we were up there. One of them was earlier, we probably had been there a couple hours, and we had a fire going, and we were kind of sitting around the fire. And every now and again, we would hear something. There was something definitely like kind of going around us in different areas. And I had my daughter's dog. I was dog sitting for her. And this dog is, if I could clone this dog, I would absolutely do it. She is like the best dog. She's a Vizsla mix. Very, very, very calm, very friendly. She's, like I said, she's not hyper. And when we got there that night, early, we got there around just before evening, around dinner time. We were playing with the dog. We were throwing a ball, and she would go and fetch it. And so we were doing a lot of this stuff. And sometimes we'll do this, sometimes if we go up there, a few of us will go up there together, and we'll do things that kind of draw attention to us. One time, a friend of ours, he is coffee. He is like caffeine incarnate, I think. He's just like a Red Bull all the time. He's energetic. I mean, this guy he's a blast, but he is hyperactive. And so he brought up a couple of lightsabers. And I don't know if you guys have seen those. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
No.
Tell us. Yeah, we're in the dark on this. No pun intended, but fill us in.
It's almost like you've seen the Star Wars movies, right? And I'm talking the original Star Wars movies.
Oh yeah.
And they're lightsabers. It's like that. It is a long, and these things are heavy. They're long.
Oh, you're talking about the flashlight, and it's got a big long colored tube on it, right?
No, it's not a flashlight. It actually,
Okay.
if you hit the sabers together, it makes that same sound like when Luke and Darth Vader were fighting in the Star Wars movies. It makes that same sound. So he brought some of those up, a couple of those up, and we were in the field at night, kind of going at it with the lightsabers together. And they were making noise, and you could see them, the wand, it was glowing, and you could see it if you were sitting around or in the woods or whatever. You could see what was going on. So we did stuff like that. I'm not talking about a rave in the woods, I'm just talking about stuff like that. I would bring.
I was thinking that, but I wasn't saying anything.
Yeah.
No mirror balls and lasers or.
It definitely wasn't a full-fledged rave out there, but it was. We do certain things like that. I have a frisbee that lights up. So we would go up there and we would play frisbee, in the dark. And all you could see was our fire, and then you could see, the frisbee going, here and there. So we also played with the frisbee that night. So when we started to settle down, it was, getting really dark, and we were just kind of settling down by the fire. We had been out in the fire, but there was something, again, walking around us, probably in, I would say, like a horseshoe pattern. It didn't go, because there was a dirt road that went up to where this field was. So it wouldn't come out into that area, in that dirt road area, because it was too open. But it would stay in the wood line all the way, like a horseshoe, shape all the way around us. So we were listening to this thing for a little while, and I think I had eaten an apple, and then I had taken an apple and kind of tossed it out into the woods to our left. So we're sitting in front of the fire. So to our left, that's where I threw the apple. Behind us, and we've been to this place many times. We've camped out there in the same area. We've walked the trails at night. Some of the things I told you about that have happened while we were out there. So behind us there's like this kind of, I don't want to, it's not really a swamp. It is kind of a wetter, area. And I sent you a picture of those footprints that were going over that wet area. I don't know if you remember, but it was in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So it was in that area. And so that's what's behind us. What's behind us is nothing. It's just like, paths and this little wet kind of stream, wet area, and, rock cliffs and things like that. So we were sitting there, it was Ray and I and Fred, and the dog was laying down by the bench that we were sitting on, and our other two friends had already gone into the tent. So we were all sitting there just kind of listening to this thing. Oh, let me back up a little bit. Earlier, before we all started to settle down, we heard a branch come down, and it wasn't that far from us, but we heard it come down, and so we all got up. I had my listening device at that point, and I turned it on, and I was listening to, anything else that we could hear, in addition to this thing that was moving all around us. So we heard that tree go down, or the tree branch go down, and it was a pretty good size. It sounded like a pretty good sized tree branch. We heard another one go down further away from us on like an opposite direction. I would have to say maybe an hour prior to that, but it wasn't. I'm sorry, an hour after that, but it was further away, and it was in the opposite direction. So again, in between this time, all this, activity is happening around us. So at one point, I was using the flashlight, and I was kind of scanning the area, and we saw something over by where I had tossed that apple, and it was low in the bush, and we couldn't really tell, what it was, but we could tell that it was kind of, looking at us or staring toward us. And that was a little bit of, I don't know, it was probably 60, 70 feet away into the wood line. And so we're kind of just like, okay, what is that? It could be anything. So nothing, but again, all this activity was going on around us, and it didn't stay in one place for very long. And so we were sitting there, and we saw that, and we're like, kind of, okay, whatever it is, shut the light off and kind of sat at the fire. All of a sudden, Fred and Ray was across from us. The other people were in the tent. Allie, the dog, she was laying, by my feet. And all of a sudden, Fred and I got a whiff of something. And immediately we both said, do you smell that? And I said, yeah, what is that? And it was I tried to explain it to Tom too. And I know it's hard to explain these smells when you smell them. But kind of a garbage, I don't know, rancid smell.
Norma, I'm going to jump in real quick. On these smells, they smell very similar to something we're familiar with. Rancid garbage, maybe decaying flesh of an animal, but it isn't that, correct? You can't really put your finger on it.
Can't
As,
really
as
put your finger on it. It's kind of a combination of a bunch of different smells mixed
yeah,
together. And you can almost like pick one out here and there, it's like, ew, what is, but you can't really put it in a category.
yes,
So that's kind of what was going on, and it was behind us. So it was in the area where the wetland would be, and behind where these trails would be, and where the rock cliffs would be. Rock cliffs are further down, but all in that area where I saw the footprints and all that stuff. So we, and there was, we heard something moving behind us after. So we were like, what is that? And it was quick. It didn't like linger for a long time. We just, I don't know, the wind, you know, blew just the right direction and we caught a whiff of it. But we definitely smelled, he and I definitely smelled something. And like I said, Ray was across from us. So he didn't, obviously it wasn't in that wind pattern that he could smell that. But, Fred and I both smelled it and we're like, wow, that's what is that? And we didn't smell it prior and we didn't smell it after. So we talked about that for a little bit. And again, the night is waning away and this thing is still moving from place to place in that horseshoe pattern around us. So we were sitting there with the dog, again, was still at my feet, and I had her tethered, to what we were sitting on because I didn't want her. She doesn't normally go after anything. She's just that docile, she hardly ever barks. Very, like I said, if I could clone her, I definitely would. So she's just that kind of dog. She's a great dog. And again, she's just sitting there, laying on the ground right next to me. So I'm pretty aware of what this dog is like, and I know her personality. I've known her. She was probably about 7 years old at this point, and I've known her since she was 10 weeks old. So we're pretty familiar with each other. I know her patterns. I know her behavior. So she's laying there next to me, and we're all good. And then, chatting, talking about that smell too, talking about the out in the direction where we saw the eye shine for whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, Allie jumps up. I mean, straight on fours. She went from sitting. It's almost like taking a car from 0 to 60. She was laying on that ground and she stood right up. She looked over in the direction where we saw the eye shine and she barked. And she was almost like a pointer, she was dead eye in that area. I mean, beeline. And as soon as she did that, as soon as she jumped up and barked, because she almost did it simultaneously, when she did that, I was on my feet in an instant because she doesn't do that. And so I was on high alert and I jumped right up and I looked in that direction. Fred was the next one up. Ray had gotten up and we kind of, Fred was right next to me when we were sitting by the fire. So he was right next to me. As soon as I stood up and, looked in that direction, Fred then stood up, Ray stood up, and we're all kind of figuring out what is going. We heard something, but we couldn't see anything. But Allie stood there for a good, I would say, like 3 to 5 minutes, just staring in that direction. And again, she didn't bark again, but she was just staring in that direction. And that was the direction that I had thrown the apple. And that's the direction that I had seen that eye shine, that we all saw the eye shine. And so after 5 minutes, or give or take, she settled down again and laid back down. And we sat back down. I said, she never does that. She never does that. So at that point, or after that point, we were all very aware of anything that was happening around us. So again, we sat there for a little while, and actually, Chris had come out of the tent and we told him, what was going on and what happened. And then he went back into the tent shortly after that. Fred was, he was ready to go. So he asked Ray if he would drive him, back down the mountain to his car. So I was sitting there at the fire, and Chris and his girlfriend were in the tent, and Ray and Fred had left, and he was bringing them down the mountain. Well, they got, I don't even know, they told me after, and it's hard to describe where this happened, but they probably went down that dirt road about, I would say, not even an eighth of a mile. I mean, it was so close to us. Where it happened was, when we heard that tree branch come down that was very close to us, when Ray was taking Fred down, they came up to a tree branch that was across the road. Now, this tree branch obviously was not there when we came up, because it was clear. Everything was clear. There was no wind that night. There was absolutely nothing going on. There had been no rainstorms, no nothing, prior to that. So there was nothing going on for quite some time before we actually gone up there. So at any rate, they're leaving and they come across this tree branch that is across the road. And it was a pretty good sized tree branch. Now, Ray had brought I think it was a gas chainsaw with him that day, because we were going to cut up wood for the fire. So he had brought his chainsaw. He was also carrying, so he had a weapon on him. So when they came across this tree branch, and I was not aware of it until after Ray came back and told me, but when he told me, he said they got to that part of the road and they couldn't go any further because the tree branch was across the road. So they had to stop and get out. Ray had to get his chainsaw and cut this tree branch so that they could move it and get out. While he was doing that, the whole time he was telling Fred, watch my back, watch my back, because there's anything going on around me, you make sure you let me know. And so he cut the tree branch, and they were able to move it out of the road, or the dirt road, and continue on down to the bottom of the hill or the mountain. And then Fred left and Ray came back up. And that's when he told me, what had happened. And they actually looked at where the tree branch had come from. It wasn't a dead tree. It was very much alive. It looked like where it came up from from where they saw it had broken off was probably about, I don't know, it was probably like, it was up there, 15, 20 feet. They could see where it had come down. And then, and they don't know why. Like I said, it was a fresh break. It was a live tree. So we wondered about that, but we're pretty sure that was the tree that we heard, because it was in that same direction that we heard it come down. We didn't know, obviously, that this branch was across the road at that point in time, but we knew which direction it had come from. So then it kind of clicked, oh, that must have been what we heard, So then we sat there for a while and talked about it. And then I think we all retired at that point. The other couple was in the tent. I went into my van, and Ray went into his, his car. We kind of kept in contact. I had a two-way and Ray had a two-way, so that we could keep in contact throughout the night. Because like I said, there was something going on around us. So that was a pretty interesting night, to say the least, especially the dog. That really got our attention.
Absolutely. It should too. That was very fascinating.
It never fails to, in this area, regardless of where we go, it's, I know that these, these creatures are in these woods. I have no doubt whatsoever. And I know people probably think I'm, off in, La La Land or something. But these things are happening, and it's
Well,
not
Norma,
just,
you and I have looked at that area, all the areas, and actually not too far from that area. I was just thinking about this earlier. The minister and his son that had the encounter, and close to the same area. So honestly, there's just too much information, too much
right. And that's
evidence.
yeah, and that's the same area that actually the peeping Bigfoot in the window. That's across. It's a kind of across the road that we actually go into this area. So it's in that same, near vicinity of that house that had the peeping Bigfoot in the road crossing. So that's what actually, I told you before, it had actually got us to that area to do the research that we wanted to do, but there's so many things out there. It doesn't matter in which direction you go in this area. It's something's going on, whether it was at the boulders, whether it was up at that field, whether it was further down, along those little, game trail paths, where we got the rock thrown at us that one time that dropped between the five of us. Just all around us. There's just too much to dismiss. You know what I'm saying?
No, you're exactly right.
If we didn't think that there was anything there before, when we first started that area, it kind of cinched it, shortly after we got there.
Well, it really did, and I also want to say, real quick, that area, you and I have looked at it. Actually, obviously, you go there all the time. It's a very significantly large area, and folks, this is in Massachusetts, what some people might not really think as a necessarily a hot spot, but actually the whole Northeast, there are these pockets all over, up and down the East Coast, especially up in the Northeast, where these creatures really have a pretty significant presence. And coupled with all the evidence that, Norma, that you've gathered, along with the sightings that have been there, the minister and his son, the Bigfoot peeking in the window, the footprints that you've seen, it's more than a slam dunk.
Not far from there is where there a couple times a white Bigfoot has been spotted.
Yes. Right.
Along that. Well, one of them was a retired officer, and not far from this house where the doctors live is, is that mountain range where that minister and his son saw that Bigfoot. And that's where that's the same area that we had gone back to. And I saw that trackway that I actually videotaped and did still photos of and measured and all of that stuff. That's not that far from the doctor's house. So that's even closer than the area that we are presently, and have been researching for quite some time. You can follow that ridge, you can follow that, that all the way down to these same areas. And we know, and you've said it many times, that they can cover ground in short periods of time. So this is nothing, to them. But obviously they like these certain places. They hang out and it doesn't. Yeah, I know that some people, say that they migrate here and they move here and they stay in a certain area for a certain amount of time. And I get that too. But this area that we've been researching, the only time that they're not there is when something is going on. It doesn't matter like the season. The only time that we've been skunked, and they're I'm not saying that every time. I'm not doing I'm not going there. I'm not saying that every time we go there something happens. Recently, yes. During this pandemic, yes. Because no one, it's very secluded, now, whereas there used to be hikers that would go there. It's not so, these hikers haven't been going there since this pandemic. The areas, some of the areas were closed. Nobody could go on, hiking trails or whatever. So it's been, kind of secluded. So I don't know, and I know I've talked to you guys about this before. There's an uptick in this activity, and we've noticed it because there have been plenty of times when we've gone out there and there's absolutely nothing going on. I'm not going to say that every single time we go out there, with the exception, again, of whatever this century is that keeps hanging around in that same area that we go back to. That again, that's the only exception. But before that, plenty of times that we'd sit there in the dark and there was nothing going on except for maybe a chipmunk or something, a bird call or, whatever, coyotes. But this area, it just seems like they are always there.
Well, here's what it sounds like to me. You've got a baseline of normal activity when they're not there. The chipmunks, it's quiet. And so what you're telling us is there's a difference. When they're there, their presence is noted with very different activity, different sounds, things being thrown at you. You see the eye shine, that sort of thing. If they're not there, then that's noted as well. You can just tell this has got to be a dead night and nothing going on.
Right. And then there's other times when we'll hear something off in the distance. But I mean, there's so many things that happen. And Bob and I, it's so funny because we'll talk about this like after we come home from being out there. We'll talk about an incident that happened that was similar, back when this happened or that happened. And it's amazing that all these different areas in this one place, things seem to always happen there. And with that juvenile that I saw by the tree, that I was narrowing in with the with the flashlight. I know that we had told you that we thought maybe a group had moved into that area. But again, when there's something going on or not something going on, there's activity. When there was one down trees, and they were putting these cut down trees, they were piling them up in the area that was our research area, that same area that we got the bluff charge, we saw the juvenile, we saw something as we were pulling in that little rock clearing that I had told you about, where the century is, in that area they were piling, in that rock area they were piling trees, cut down trees in there. And the whole entire time that they were doing this in the woods around there was absolutely no activity, none whatsoever. And it wasn't until and they cleared out, because they were leaving heavy equipment and stuff like that there. So once they cleared out, and it took a little bit of time before things started to happen again. That was I think it was a couple summers before the pandemic happened. So it was like, nothing going on, nothing at all. And it was almost like, you know. We don't what anything, you know, even off in the distance, just do something, you know. But
Right.
no, absolutely no.
Well, Norman, this is fascinating. We love it when we hear from you and you've got some new information, and I appreciate it. Always enjoy talking to you, and we know that you're going to stay in touch. We know that you're going to get some new information for us. So, thank you again. It's great. It's good hearing from you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you guys, and I really appreciate you, asking me to come on and let.
Yes,
Always
absolutely.
appreciate it, Norma.
So much fun.
All right, folks. Well, listen. Stay tuned for the next segment. We'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.